This in particular goes with the national security education or national defense education that students receive at the high school level, which is a nationalistic approach to education that is meant to protect the Turkish community against religious, sectarian, and racial and class conflicts. Is the only way to ensure a peaceful process in the development of the Turkish nation on a path to civilization. Now, this has led to several groups being marginalized, those who are more religious, and of course minorities. In an interview with one teacher who is simultaneously in the position of being a minority as both a woman and a member of a religious minority and as a member of an ethnic minority, but is also in the position of being a representative of the Turkish state, in her position as teacher, said, quote, "In Turkey, when we say education, what we are really doing is creating the behaviors the state desires within young individuals. Thus, I find myself trying to do something I don't want to do. It is difficult to do this job, even though here in Turkey it is a holy job. Every day, when I take the oath, when I go through these practices, it feels like I am lying. I feel like everyone is my enemy." Through this quote and the additional issues, you can see that education is seen as a gateway in Turkey. It's a gateway not only to more opportunities economically, educationally, socially, and politically. It leads to the best jobs and the best houses, etc. But also that it's become something that's very protected. The state wants to make sure that education happens in a certain way and has therefore centralized education. It's created sacred secular spaces in the schools across Turkey. But it is also a gatekeeper to all of the things that the Turkish culture has deemed a high priority, such as education and good jobs, while also putting teachers in the position of being gatekeepers and making sure that they're the ones who impart Turkish nationalism into their students. The role of the military in Turkey and in Turkish education is, of course, important for all students, but is most concentrated on men and defining men's roles in Turkey, as women cannot serve in the military. However, when the Republic was established, education first went to define women as mothers, complementing the duty of men to be soldiers. There's a famous quote from Atatürk that says, "The most important duty of a woman is motherhood. The importance of this duty is better understood if one considers that the earliest education takes place in one's mother's laps. Our nation has decided to be a strong nation. Therefore, our women too will be enlightened and learned like men, will go through the educational stages." But when the Republic started sending women to school in mass numbers, women's education was different than men's in that it was more concentrated on motherhood, but also it was more concentrated on their appearance. During the 1920s and 30s, many students' uniforms included hats similar to those that the military wore, both men's and women's. And women described their dress codes in secondary schools as tight and rigid. Their hair had to be either short or pulled back in braids or ponytails. Short hair was preferred because it fit well into the officially promoted hygienic image of the modern woman. Makeup was forbidden in schools, as was any headwear or accessories except for bobby pins. Dresses had long headlines, and girls were required to wear them with thick brown or black stockings. This was true for teachers too, and there are stories, or in my interviews there were discussions of teachers who had been told to cut their hair during interviews, and of course could not wear the headscarf. Female teachers in particular, from the founding of the Republic, were employed by the state to were encouraged to enter the teaching profession as a mission and obligation to modernize the nation, To this day, many school teachers view themselves as being on a mission to protect the foundations of the Republic. But there's clearly a divide among school teachers, those who see themselves as defenders of the Republic and those who distance themselves from it. Going back to the students in education as well, the headscarf issue really recentered the role of women in education from motherhood to both motherhood and women as the embodiment of secularism in Turkey, where men maintained their status as those who convey the military aspect of Turkish nationalism. Women really became the emphasis of Turkish secularism. So beginning after the 1982, universities first banned students from wearing the headscarves and professors, and then it was banned from school teachers as well. There were several, as I'm sure everyone knows, instances where the policy of the headscarf ban was reversed and then later re-implemented. But that did not apply just to teachers as they were at school. Reports also emerged of teachers who wore the headscarf while they were not at school being fired, and that mothers of elementary age children have been kept from entering school grounds because they wore the headscarf. The presence of the headscarf on women near a school even has begun to make some uncomfortable. However, many teachers commented on how difficult they found their position to be in relation to the headscarf issue. For instance, one interviewee told me, quote, "My mother and my best friend both wear the headscarf. They are smart women. My mother supports my family, my mother and my two brothers, because my father doesn't work. My father doesn't force her to wear the headscarf, though. My best friend's family does not force my friend to wear the headscarf. They do it because they want to. Neither of them feel pressure to wear the headscarf, and I don't want to wear it, and they don't pressure me. But I think they should be able to wear the headscarf. I think all women should be able to wear the headscarf. I think it's a woman's right. But as a teacher, it's my duty to not teach girls who wear the headscarf." During the time the headscarf issue was increasing in prominence, the meaning of the headscarves also changed. In the 1950s, a headscarf was more of a sign of a village woman, a woman who was harmless in both her social stature and her intelligence. But in the 1970s and the 1960s, as more and more women from the village lifestyle were obtaining an education, headscarf women were seen more as a sign of Islam. In the 1990s and the 2000s, this has changed again. Turkish women who wear the headscarf are now seen as a political symbol, a threatening sign of militant Islam embodied in a woman who wants to overthrow the government and replace it with theocracy. This has had a very limiting effect for headscarf women's lives. Some of them have been banned from public offices and hospitals, in addition to having been banned from education. Others have found that they were not socially desirable as potential wives. Although some headscarf women challenge the stereotypes with their support of secularism and the questioning of how modernity is constructed in Turkey, they have yet to overcome the belief that one must question Turkish modernity, that in order to question Turkish modernity, they first must legitimize themselves as modern Turks by taking off their headscarf. Modernity is thus a fundamental concept of contemporary Turkish nationalism, and a quest to be seen as modern. Turkish leaders in the 1920s granted Turkish women many political rights and initiated the development of secularism. But in the decades that have followed, education became a focal point for all Turkish families, and Western education became particularly prized. A link also formed among nationalism, education, and the military, most notably by every student having to take classes on military science, and the military then being the model of the ideal Turkish man. The Turkish military prided itself on its technological developments and its modernity in proving that Turkey is modern. But Turkish women, in order to prove that they were modern, have faced the burden of having to embody secularism through not wearing the headscarf and proving their allegiance to the Turkish state's dictation of their dress. Now, to talk a little bit about the policies, one of the primary ways that you can see Turkish education policy having affected greatly, or nationalism having affected Turkish education policy is through centralization. One of the components of modernization policy that was implemented at the formation of the Republic was unification and centralization of education policy. And in the quotes from the interviews that I had, you had many individuals, not just the few that I quoted from, saying that they felt a tension between having to uphold the values of secularism and militarism and nationalism that were dictated them from the central education offices in Istanbul, with their own personal feelings and their own personal experiences at the local level. Although centralization at the time the Republic was formed was a sign of modernity, perhaps in a more democratizing time, decentralization and making nationalism less top-down, more localized, and having local individuals have more say, their voices rising up to the national level, would be able to make Turkish nationalism more reflective of the Turkey that is the Turkey of today, while also releasing some of the tension that is present among teachers, students, and the Turkish community in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Neslihan Cevik from University of Virginia. Title of the talk is Re-theorizing Contemporary Islam in Turkey, Muslimism, and Sites of Hybridity.
Hybridity. Well, thanks for everyone who put labor in this. Oh. That's that. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for everyone who put labor in this conference today and who brought us here, and especially to Kadir, Ustun, and Yilmaz. So my paper reads, Re-theorizing Contemporary Islam in Turkey, Muslimism. Conventional theories in IR and sociology assume a divide between religion and modernity. They prescribe that under a culminating modernity, religion either rejects modernity, and this is what we term fundamentalism, or it fully submits to it, converting into liberal theologies. The same theories also either reduce religious mobilization to mere political mobilization or to mere cultural expressions. And these divides are in particular defining for IR perspectives on Islam. Well, I identify any emergence of any type of an Islamic orthodoxy in Turkey that challenges these binary divisions, and I term this as Muslimism. Neither liberal submission nor fundamentalist rejection, Muslimism embraces aspects of moral life while submitting that life to a sacred moral order. Okay. More specifically, differing from both Islamist and liberal establishments, Muslimism is a hybrid identity frame empowering engagements between Islam and modernity. And this is much deeper than what Roy has previously called Sharia plus electricity, and we can talk about that later. Today in this talk, I will briefly introduce the conditions for and the content of Muslimism, then I will draw the implications for rethinking IR assumptions about religion, in particular Islam, global processes, and international. But before detailing Muslimism, I want to show a picture that fashionably challenges the assumed divide between Islam and modernity as it articulates Islamic rules of covering with cutting-edge principles of modern fashion. And as you can see in the middle, we have the audience, and who are now, they're no less fashionable than the models of the catwalk. Now, this doesn't only challenge the IR assumptions, but it also challenges the Islamist establishments. This is a picture from a small neighborhood in Iraq, and the mannequins are dressed in the Turkish style Islamic covering, but this time they're not examples of Islamic chicness, but they're examples of degenerate Muslim women who will burn eternally for turning men into voracious monsters. So you might say, so what, you have the fashion shows? I mean, is this, simply global consumerism? Well, not so much, because the pious Turks had not only launched fashion shows, but they also established HR organizations that combine Western references of HR with Islamic ones, businessman situations that articulate Islamic ethics with principles of free market, women's rights associations that retrieve progressive Islamic concepts such as ijtihad and masalih, simply referring to social adaptation, to combat against male-dominant interpretations of hadith or Quran. And they also put together political formations, such as the Justice and Development Party, who promotes a liberal national polity on the one hand, and a foreign policy that's both West and East oriented. So in other words, while Muslimism is not state-centered and it cares about everyday life and fashion shows and lifestyles, it's not a mere cultural expression. It engages the political space and it has profound implications for the political space. So why the term Muslimism? There are actually a couple more concepts that are really popular. Moderate Islamism, used in policy circles, and post-Islamism, more of an academic term. But I am deliberately moving away from those concepts and deliberately coming up with the term Muslimism. Now I can talk more in more details after the talk with some questions. But basically, within the compass of Muslimism, the aim is neither a top-down nor a bottom-up political takeover. So the phenomenon, the orthodoxy, is neither state nor community-centered, but individual-oriented. The main aim is to construct a lifestyle in which the individual believer can be incorporated into modernity without being marginalized and while protecting